Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing It Came From the Net. As we're going on the theme of viewer's choice for this month, we had a poll up on the community page, as you can see right here, where you got to pick the promotion that we review. We had WWE, WCW, ECW, AWA, or Evolve, all promotions that you could find shows on Peacock for. The winner, as you can see, ECW. And I don't know if maybe it's because a lot of you guys know how fond I am of ECW, and maybe you guys picked that because you would see me review something I really like, or there's just a general interest in ECW over all of those other brands. But I really do appreciate that was what won. With that being said, the ECW show I selected is The Doctor Is In. Originally, this was a home video release, which also got aired as part of Hardcore TV, and it looks like they actually used the original RF video for what's on Peacock, other than of course a lot of the music is edited out. With that being said, if you haven't seen any of my videos before, I do grade everything on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. Let's jump right in. We start the show with the Sandman coming out to the ring. He's followed by Raven. Raven has a broken foot. They're scheduled to have a World Championship match later on in the night. This is right in the middle of their feud, where Raven has the Sandman's wife on his side, Peaches, and also his son Tyler, who Raven somewhat, I guess, has him worshiping him kind of as a cult leader. This is a cool opening, kind of setting up that Raven is not going to be able to wrestle with the broken foot. Raven, his members of his nest, the Blue Meanie, Nova, and Stevie Richards, before they were the Blue World Order, they all attack Sandman here, and Sandman gets hit in the eye with a Singapore cane, which injures him as well. Pretty good opening segment. Obviously, anything dealing with Raven and Sandman and ECW, especially during this time frame, is going to be highly enjoyable for me. I really love what they did with that story, and I really love what they did here. And it was a nice setup for something that happens later on the show. That's followed up with our first match of the show. We get Mikey Whipwreck going up against Devon Storm. Devon Storm, you may know better as Crowbar from WCW later on in his run. He has with him Damian Kane and Lady Alexandria, who are kind of lower card manager team. Damian Kane was a wrestler at times too. He was like a wrestler manager type, and Lady Alexandria was his wife. I think they were actually married in real life as well. If you watched ECW during this time frame, you would have seen them on a lot of their shows. This was a really fun opener. This was your quintessential, what would be known as like the cruiserweight division in WCW, a more faster paced lucha inspired kind of match. Mikey had just gotten out of where he was the guy that wins on accident to where he was starting to become more of a well-rounded wrestler, which I always liked how they slowly built him into a credible wrestler. I thought the evolution of Mikey Whipwreck was awesome. Mikey Whipwreck does pick up the win on this one. I think this is a good match. I liked it starting the show. I'm giving it a 3. That's followed up with a match with Johnny Smith, famously from All Japan Pro Wrestling, going up against Louis Spicolli. And I gotta believe that Johnny Smith kind of came there as part of the package with bringing in Dr. Death Steve Williams, who we'll see later in the show. That's why the show's named what it is. And probably had some sort of a deal with All Japan to use these guys. Louis Spicolli, you may know from his time being part of the NWO Wolfpack and kind of Scott Hall's lackey, or his other time in the WWE where he was Rad Radford. He's a guy that unfortunately passed away not too long after this, actually. Maybe, I would say within a year of this, he passed away, which is very sad because he was extremely talented. Johnny Smith as well. Johnny Smith isn't as well known with American fans as he's known in England or in Japan. I'm pretty sure he has some familiar ties to the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith. I know they've been said that they were cousins. I'm not 100% sure if that's a legit fact, but I think there is some kind of family connection there. This again was another good match. Johnny Smith picked up the win here. I'm giving this one a 3. That's followed up with what would be what most people think of as ECW style matches, where if you really watch ECW, there was no one style. It wasn't all hardcore. It was hardcore. It was cruiserweight. It was Japanese influence, strong style, King's Road. They did a little bit of everything, even sports entertainment. But this is what most people think of as the ECW style. We get Axel Rotten going up against Devon Dudley. This was when Devon was on the outs with the rest of the Dudley clan when he first arrived in ECW, and the rest of the Dudley clan was all faces and he was basically the heel. This was an interesting match because Axel's a little bit different than the Axel we would see him evolve into. He plays a little bit more of a chicken shit heel here than he normally would. And it's kind of a heel versus heel match, which wasn't popular at the time. I enjoyed this. Ultimately, though, the rest of the Dudleys come down and they come out to attack Devon, that being Bubba, Chubby Dudley, Sign-On Dudley, Big Dick Dudley. They all come out there, ultimately having the match end in a no contest. We do get to see Bubba get more violent and actually attack Devon. Up until this point, he had not been willing to do so. So there was a bit of story arc being told here. I thought this was good. It was a good brawl. I'm giving this one a 3. Next up, we have Stevie Richards coming to the ring with Raven, and they're in full-on Kiss makeup. Stevie Richards and the members of the Blue World Order, that is, which they weren't the Blue World Order yet. This is part of what led them there. They would do impressions of other things. They did like the Blue Bloods. They did Kiss here. There's a couple other things that are slipping my mind that they did impressions of. But Stevie basically says that he talked to Todd Gordon, and Todd Gordon okayed it. He made a great decision for Stevie to defend Raven's championship against the Sandman since Raven's injured. This angers Raven. He attacks Stevie, DDTs him, which brings out the Sandman, who's got a tape over his face with the eye covered, selling the eye injury from earlier, which is kind of an ongoing story with Sandman in ECW. He had several times where he got caned in his eye and they tried to sell an eye injury. The most famous one being against Tommy Cairo, where he actually would not go out of his house for a month because he was selling the eye injury and he didn't want any of the fans to see him out in public. This was a fun match. This is, when you think of the Raven style and ECW style and everything here, this was it. This was storytelling. This was overly involved. The aforementioned people get involved. I'm going to keep calling the Blue World Order members because it's easier to say that and saying all three of the names. Missy Hyatt's involved for the Sandman. Peaches gets involved for Raven. Ultimately, it's what you would think of, even if you've never seen an ECW Raven match and you've seen his WCW matches. This was kind of the Raven style. Somehow, Stevie Richards picks up the win when the Sandman can't fight back against the odds. I thought this was really fun. I really enjoyed this. I'm giving this one a 4. That's followed with probably my second favorite match of the card. That's Too Cold Scorpio going up against Lionheart Chris Jericho. This is an excellent match. I mean, you have two of the preeminent wrestlers, two of the guys that really pushed forward the style of wrestling in the 90s. Too Cold being a guy that really innovated where bigger wrestlers could do high-flying moves. His 450 is a thing of beauty. His tumbleweed, the twisting leg drop, is a thing of beauty. Spoiler, he hits a shooting star press to end the match in this match, which is amazing, seeing a guy at this time, a guy of that size doing it, where I think there was only 2 or 3 people in the whole world that were doing it. Him, Liger, and I really can't think of who else, but I know that there were other people that were doing it. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. If you know, put it down here in the comments who was doing shooting star presses in the late 90s other than Liger and Too Cold Scorpio. Jericho was just starting to really make a name for himself here. He was really getting that buzz that would eventually bring him into WCW and then on to greater things, on to being arguably one of the greatest wrestlers of this generation and maybe of all time. I mean, the guy has accolades that'll stack up against almost anybody. He's got multiple Intercontinental Championships, multiple World Championships, won championships in every promotion he's ever been in. Just an absolute legend. Scorpio, unfortunately, does not have the accolades, but he probably should. I think Scorpio is one of those guys that was highly underrated and highly underused in his time. He was actually an amazing wrestler. I really enjoyed this. Like I said, Too Cold Scorpio did pick up the win after the shooting star press. I'm giving this one a 4. I really like this. That's followed up with another segment that kind of shows another historic moment in ECW history. We have the Pitbulls coming out, Pitbull 1, Pitbull 2. Pitbull 1, Gary Wolf, had his neck broken in a match with Shane Douglas, and he's given an update on that, basically saying he may or may not wrestle ever again, that his doctors are suggesting he shouldn't. Spoiler, he eventually does. But that's basically setting up a grudge match with Pitbull number 2 versus Shane Douglas. That obviously brings out Shane Douglas. Shane has with him Francine, who had recently turned on the Pitbulls to join Shane Douglas as part of this angle. And this is one of those stories that doesn't really get talked about a lot in the annals of ECW history, because there's so many great stories. Taz and Sabu, Dreamer and Raven, the Dudley Boys and everybody, Awesome and Tanaka, Tajiri and Super Crazy. You talk about a lot of these other feuds. This is kind of a low-key one that doesn't get quite the recognition for being as good of a feud as it was. There was so much intensity in it, so much high stakes in it. Shane Douglas, absolutely fantastic wrestler. Both of the Pitbulls, for men of their size, they could move. And again, it's another showing that evolution, because 5 years before this, the Pitbulls would have wrestled like the Road Warriors. And that's not a knock to the Road Warriors. I think they're one of the great teams of all time. But you're starting to see guys like these coming up, guys like Rhino eventually, who are bigger, but they're wrestling more of a little man style. Yes, they still had the power moves. Kind of reminiscent of the Steiner brothers. If you've never seen the Pitbulls wrestle, they kind of resembled the Steiners and how they would wrestle. This is another good match. Ultimately, Shane picks up the win here. I'm giving this one a 3. Next up, we have the reason for the show. It's a Dream Tag Partner match. This is in the feud with Brian Lee and Tommy Dreamer. Each man gets to select a dream partner to be their teammate for the match. Brian Lee selects Taz. Tommy Dreamer selects the only man that Taz fears, or as they say on commentary, that's Dr. Death Steve Williams. And this is just great. First off, the ECW arena eats up Dr. Death Steve Williams. He gets probably the biggest reaction of anybody on the card. And when you think about that, when you hear the names that are on this card, you have a lot of the legendary ECW wrestlers. Whether it's Raven, Sandman, Tommy Dreamer, Taz. Later on, you're going to see the Gangstas come out, Sabu, Rob Van Dam. You have a lot of the big players in ECW, and Dr. Death gets a huge reaction. And it's partly because you didn't get to see Doc that often. A lot of it is the ECW and Philadelphia fans have always been fans that were considered smart fans that are in the know of wrestling. A lot of the people that would be there would be the same people that are getting the All Japan Pro Wrestling tapes to watch Dr. Death Steve Williams and some of his great matches there against like Misawa and Kobayashi. I mean, he was absolutely amazing. And a lot of them remembered him from his UWF and Mid-South days even. This was a fun match. It goes all over the place, brawls through the crowd. At one point, Taz T-Bone suplexes Dreamer through tables off of the crow's nest, which seemed to be Tommy Dreamer's favorite spot, getting thrown off of that crow's nest. We've seen Brian Lee chokeslam him from there. We've seen him take suplexes off of there. We've seen him do moves to other people off of there. Bill Alfonso and Beulah McGillicuddy get into a brawl in the ring as the others are outside, which eventually leads to them having a match which, unironically, is one of the most iconic ECW matches of all time. You have a valet versus a manager, and they put on a classic in ECW, which, go figure. This is a really fun match, a wild brawl, very much in the vein of what you would expect from an ECW show. Ultimately, Brian Lee and Taz pick up the win here, which was a little bit surprising to me because I kind of figured with Dr. Death being the name of the show, he might win, and I knew he didn't because I've seen this before. I thought this was a really fun match. I'm giving this one a 4. Next up, we have the Eliminators defending their tag team championship in a 4-way match. They're going up against the Bruise Brothers, Ron and Don Harris, or Ron and Don Bruise as they were called here, the Gangstas, New Jack and Mustafa, and the Samoan Gangster Party, which was Sammy the Silk, aka Samu, and Matty Smalls, who would go on to be Rosie a little bit later on in his wrestling career, or the superhero in training as you may know him, or the bigger brother of Roman Reigns. I always liked the Samoan Gangster Party, and the funny thing is, they wrestled this match in handcuffs because they got handcuffed earlier due to getting arrested, which was a cool thing. They had a nice little feud here going with them and the Gangstas. I think that a lot more could have been done with this team. You know, Samu's a great wrestler. Matty Smalls, aka Rosie's a great wrestler. They could have done a little more with them. I don't know why they never did. But anywho, this was just one of those matches that ECW puts on. It's a fast-paced, action all over the place, people everywhere. You can't blink or you're going to miss something kind of match. This was really fun. Ultimately, the Gangstas pick up the win here to win the tag championship. I thought it was a fun match. I'm giving it a 3. That leads us right into our main event of the evening. In a stretcher match, we have Sabu versus Rob Van Dam. And for some of you that may not know the history, you may think, weren't these guys tag team partners and always affiliated with each other? They were. But when Van Dam first came into ECW, he had a feud with Sabu over him not wanting to respect Sabu. Which if you even watch during their tag days, they had elements of that in the tag team matches when they were partners. I mentioned earlier on my Too Cold Scorpio Jericho match that was my second favorite match of the night. This was my favorite, and it's not hard to see why. Much like Too Cold and Jericho were pushing forward pro wrestling and what it could be, Van Dam and Sabu were right there with them. I will argue till my face turns neon blue that Sabu is one of the most influential wrestlers that nobody gives credit to. The amount of spots and moves that are straight up stolen from Sabu, the style that he wrestled is so innovative. Rob Van Dam too. Van Dam has his fair share of clones or Van Dam impersonators. I don't think he gets as much as Sabu, but a lot of people that are influenced from Van Dam flat out say they are. Whereas you don't hear a lot of people say they're influenced by Sabu, but if you watch them, they were. You could tell. I mean, anybody from Christopher Daniels to the Young Bucks to even the Hardy Boys, who are contemporaries of these guys, you could see elements of what Sabu did, elements of what Van Dam did in all of their styles. You could see just a few years into the future, with Ring of Honor gaining fame, with the X Division and TNA gaining fame, the influence of a Sabu, the influence of a Rob Van Dam. This match is as you could expect. It's fun, it's crazy. I'm not a huge fan of the stretcher matches or ambulance matches as a match type, because I think there's a little bit of, it just doesn't really work. There's too much time after the big moment to the end of the match for me to really be excited about it. Like with this, with the stretcher match, the plan is you have to incapacitate a wrestler long enough for them to be taken to the back on a stretcher. That to me, I'd like it better if it was like a 10 count. They couldn't answer a 10 count like a Texas death match. So that's just being nitpicky if I'm being honest, because they did pull this off. The stretcher got involved. Sabu had a leg injury from where he moonsaulted and hit his leg legitimately on the guardrail. Not sure how legit the injury was. Van Dam ultimately goes for a flipping move onto Sabu, who's on the stretcher. Sabu moves out of the way. Van Dam hits the stretcher and then hits his head on the concrete, which probably gave him a real-life concussion, and that would be the finish, because he was not able to continue after. Sabu picks up the win when they take Van Dam to the back. I thought this was highly entertaining. Even with me not liking this style of matches, these two guys found a way to make me like their match. And that is a testament of how good these guys both are. They're both fantastic wrestlers. I'm giving this one a 5. Like I said, it's my favorite match of the card. Ultimately, up and down this card, I thought it was really good. You get to see a lot of what made ECW special here. The wrestling matches like Too Cold and Jericho, Mikey Whipwreck and Devin Storm, Johnny Smith and Louis Spicolli. You get to see some of the storyline-based stuff. Shane Douglas and the Pitbulls, Raven and Sandman. You get to see things like the Wild Brawls with the 4 tag teams, or Axel and Devon. You get to see the innovations of Sabu and Rob Van Dam, which I just gushed about for probably ever and a day. You get to see all of this all on one card. And that's what I like best about wrestling. This is why ECW, to me, is such a special promotion, because it's not just one thing. You could just as easily see a comedy segment with the Blue World Order on here as you could see a Cruiserweight Classic with Tajiri and Super Crazy, or a wild, insane hitting chairs into their heads, which I know is very dangerous now, tight match with Mike Awesome and Masato Tanaka, or the interweavings of insane storylines like Raven and Sandman and how Sandman's family got involved. I think this is a good example of a card that not a lot of people talk about as being representative of what ECW was. Their willingness to bring in outside wrestlers and have them work in their company, Johnny Smith, Dr. Death Steve Williams. Their willingness to put these guys over as stars, even though they're not going to be there for long. Them showing off all the different styles. I thought this was a really good card. I rather enjoyed this. I'm going to give the whole show a 4. I thought it was really good. And I really liked it, everything. I mean, like I said, you got a lot of the luminaries here. You have a lot of the reason why ECW is special. I highly recommend checking this out if you've never watched it. With that being said, if you made it here to the end of the video, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see where it says join, that's how you become a member. And if you made it here to the end, leave me a Dr. Death in the comments for Dr. Death Steve Williams, who the show is named after. He deserves all the respect he gets. What an amazing athlete. Rest in peace, Dr. Death. You were awesome. With all that being said, my name is George Coles. Stay tuned to the community page to see what you're going to vote for next Friday's show, or next that came from the network. The vote ends on Friday. Anyway, my name is George Coles, and this has been another It Came From the Network.